So you want to start watercolor, but you want to do it in a way that gives you more of a guarantee of success or satisfaction when you know you don't have a ton of time to spend on it. Okay, I got you. Now I know. You usually hear practice makes perfect. You've got to try it and do it again and again and again to get better. And that is true, but there's also a flip side. There's a way to do this watercolor thing where you don't have to just grind and hustle and practice and repeat and all the things to get a ton of joy out of it. And today I'm going to show you exactly what to use and how, so you can get fast joy out of your watercolor experience without spending forever and ever, amen, on this new hobby. First up, what supplies should you use? And I'm asked this all the time, and I'm a little biased, so just know that going in. Now, I've done a ton of reviews here, all different brands, manufacturers, you name it. But honestly, there are two things that I think will give you tons of joy power when it comes to starting off this journey, and that is number one, my watercolor brush set, and number two, my own watercolor palette. Now, I can hear some of your eyes rolling as I speak, but stick with me because I'm going to show you how to start off this journey regardless of the supplies that you use. So this isn't a promo video for my specific products. Let's talk about brushes. Friends, for me, beginners should be using a synthetic brush. I specifically love nylon, and I mean synthetic, not a synthetic that kind of feels like natural hair, but like a synthetic that feels like a synthetic. Because here's a little secret. The brushes that are either natural hair bristles or the brushes that are made to feel like they're natural hair bristles have a much steeper learning curve for beginners. Synthetic bristles or nylon bristles, they're not gonna hold as much water as a natural bristle brush would, but that's okay. You can work around that. And honestly, your brush having a little less water on it as a beginner is gonna make you feel more in control. And that's a good thing for the joy chasing. So with every recommendation I give you, it's really my top priority to make sure that you stay joyful as much as possible and for as long as possible, because I want you to keep going with this hobby and not abandon it out of frustration. Okay, let's talk about paint. You don't need a large palette, but I do believe in a specific palette, so you don't have to focus too much on color mixing to get a really beautiful array of colors starting out. And so that's why I suggest the palette of my own design, the Art for Joy's Sake palette. The 12 colors that I've chosen and developed are specifically designed to give you a ton of versatility without ever mixing two colors together. But at the same time, if you choose to mix any two of them or more together, you're going to get a ton of options easily. And I believe in a beginner watercolor palette that has exciting colors, what some might call fashion colors, not just the traditional, at times ho-hum basics. Okay, last but not least, we need to talk about paper. Now, I'm trying to keep all of this beginner entry-level hobby budget under $100. But it's really the paper that could take you right over the edge. But honestly, friends, all things said, my brushes and my palette definitely aren't in the necessarily budget category. So I'm gonna link a video below that talks about a lot of options, especially for palettes that are more affordable than mine, that are lovely and will work really well for you. And it's here that I need to talk about the whole joy chasing thing. Because I'll be honest, in order to have a really satisfying experience with this new hobby watercolor thing, you're gonna wanna spend a little bit more. Sure, you can get Crayolas and more affordable paper and really simple brushes and spend about $40, but you could spend $80 and be sure, almost guarantee, that your experience when you first put brush to paper is so much more exciting and knocks out a ton of frustration that comes from using the wrong supplies. And I get it, $80 to $100 is a ton of money to spend on a hobby. But if you have the budget and this hobby is something that you really feel excited about, I just want to make the point that spending the extra budget is going to catapult your experience beyond what you could even imagine. And that brings me back to chasing that joy, using the supplies that keep you invested emotionally and push away the frustration that comes so easily when you're first starting out a new hobby, watercolor especially. So here's the thing. If you already have some supplies and they've just been sitting around, use those. Don't spend another dime. Just like literally paint today. Like finish watching this video and paint. But if you haven't started yet and you don't have any supplies and you have a little bit of the extra budget to spend, then I would highly recommend the items that I'm mentioning here today. All right, friends, how are we feeling about this? Is the budget just kind of freaking you out? Let me know in comments. Ask me any questions you might have about ways to keep this even more budget friendly, and I will be happy to answer them. And if you feel like you're getting some value out of this, even though we haven't even painted yet, and yes, we will be painting really soon, go ahead and give this video a boop. That's a like. So we talked about brushes, we talked about paint, and the big elephant in the room, paper. Now, the whole conversation about paper could be another 10 videos, but I'm just gonna give you the fast and loose version. If you absolutely don't have the budget for everything I mentioned in this video, save your budget for the paper. Get the best paper possible. And in my opinion, the best paper for the money as a beginner is Academy watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton, it's incredible, and I'm gonna definitely have the link for that below. Okay, before we get to painting, we're so close. Here is a look at the 3 things I think you need as a beginner watercolor painter. Number 1, the Art for Joy's Sake watercolor brush set. Number 2, the Art for Joy's Sake watercolor palette. And number 3, a small block of Academy watercolor paper, and you'll be good to go. Okay, here's some simple budget edits. If you only have room for 1 brush, I recommend my 1/4" dagger. I'm gonna have a link for that below. If you can't put it in the budget to spend $42 on a palette, I have a few other more budget-friendly options linked below. But I'm really gonna encourage you to stick with the Academy paper. It's just fantastic. I paint with it every single day as a professional, and I really love how budget-friendly it is. Okay, let's get in the actually what to do once all this stuff arrives. Here's a quick warm-up for you. I love this one. First things first, open up your palette, and if you have little half pans like my palette, I want you to take a spray bottle or an eyedropper and just get that palette wet. Don't worry about getting water everywhere. That's the point. You want to loosen up, juice up those colors, let it sit for about 20 to 30 seconds, and you'll be ready to go. So when you pick up that paint on your brush, it's gonna feel almost a little syrupy, and that's what you're looking for. And this is it, friends. You're going to paint some hearts, some simple hearts. So with that 1/4" dagger brush and the tip of it, you're just going to sketch an outline of a heart. It's going to be imperfect, and then you're gonna fill it in. You might feel like you need to add a little more pigment or water on your brush, so add more water or paint if you feel that brush dragging a little bit, but otherwise don't worry too much about exactly how you're doing this. Next thing you want to do is grab another color. In terms of what color, just grab whatever your eye goes to, make another heart and bump it up in one place next to the first heart you painted. And you're basically going to continue that. You're going to fill that whole 5x7 watercolor page with these hearts, and just bump one section of each heart up to another section of another heart. And the point with that bumping is to watch the colors blend and explode into one another. If you're not getting those explosions, it just means that your hearts don't have enough water on them, and you can just add a little more water as you go. So literally, you could paint over the heart that you painted that isn't really exploding with clean water. And then when you paint another heart next to it, you'll see the explosions happen. Now friends, if you're curious, you want to deep dive into beginner watercolor techniques, I have the perfect video for you. I'm going to link it below. I would finish this video up first though, but head there next. We're going to paint a simple flower using all of the brushes, friends. And what I've done first, I've gone ahead using my flat wash brush. That's the biggest one. And I've created 5 petals with a favorite color. And then while those petals are wet, I've gone back in with a slightly darker version. In this case, it's a slightly darker orange, and I'm using the 1/4" dagger and adding a few little strokes that give a little shadow or accent. The darker orange strokes I'm making with the 1/4" dagger, that's being made into the damp page, which means the first color I put down still hasn't dried completely, and that's okay. Next, I'm grabbing the 1/2" dagger in my brush collection, and I've chosen my favorite green. Don't feel like you have to mix up a special green. And I've used a press and lift technique, where you press your loaded brush down to the page and you lift it up without dragging it too much at all. And I've done that in kind of a teardrop configuration. So there's about 6 petals that make up this larger teardrop form. A little bit more greenery on the other side. Friends, grab the green you love at this point. So far I've been using only 2 greens. But if you want to add a third, go for it. Again, a light touch to make some long stems, and then some press, drag, and leaves at the end of the stems. Now I'm still using that 1/2 inch dagger going into the center with a yellow with a few press and lift marks to fill in, but not perfectly fill in that center with yellow. All right, now I'm getting into my 3rd green, and remember friends, I'm just grabbing whatever I'm finding on my palette. I'm not mixing color. And this was a press, a long drag, and a very slow and gradual lift. Now surprise, I'm doing that press, drag, and lift a second time, basically a mirror of the first stroke I made with that 3rd green color, leaving a little white space in between. And now you have a larger or wider leaf that looks like it has a little vein detailing in the center. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing up here on the left-hand side of my orange flower next to those green viney leaves that I added earlier. And I'm liking this look, so I'm gonna go ahead and add yet another one in, but I reloaded my brush. So when I say reload my brush, I'm adding more pigment and more water to the consistency that feels like I'm gonna get a nice juicy coverage on the page. Now getting a sense of what that exactly feels like takes a little bit more time, but if you're putting color down and it just feels scratchy and dry and it's not flowing, you just need a little more water on your brush. And friends, a little reminder at this point, I realize that this flower is not easy. This is your first flower. And you know what? It's not supposed to feel like you've got it all figured out. It's gonna be weird and yours isn't gonna look like mine. But what I do hope that you find after this first experience with watercolor is a feeling of exhilaration, excitement, and like, oh gosh, maybe I can do this. Yeah, that's all I want for you right now. So don't put too much pressure on yourself, okay? I'm switching up to the cat's tongue brush. That's the one with the dark green handle. It's kind of got the point that's right at the center of the brush. And I've got my orange, but I did mix in a little red, or you could go in straight with red using a very light touch and just the tip of that brush. I'm adding some slightly curved marks all around the outside or perimeter of the yellow center I added earlier. Some are shorter, some are longer. If some are thicker, thinner, it doesn't matter, it's all good. I'm gonna take that same reddish orange, and you might need to reload, and I'm gonna do a press and lift like we did earlier, but you're gonna notice with this cat's tongue, it's a stiffer brush. And so that press and lift is going to easily produce a really pretty soft triangle shape. After you've done about, I'd say 8 to 10 of those press and lift, and press harder in some areas, so some of those marks are bigger and lighter, so some are smaller. You're gonna thoroughly rinse your brush, load up with whatever green your eye goes to first, and again with a super light touch, add some stems that connect all of those orange marks that you made. Now, you want the base where all the stems meet to kind of meet in a point, and then everything fans out upwards from there. A few more of those reddish orange marks down below. Repeat the press and lift, do a few less this time, and then rinse thoroughly and add those green stems. And don't worry if your stems are thicker than mine. Getting a nice thin stem takes some time. Now there is another brush in this collection that actually really makes thin stem marks super easy. It's coming up. All right, next up is my number 2 round brush from the collection using that same reddish orange, and you're gonna be making more detail marks like we did earlier, or very early on in the painting, around and on top of your flower petals. Now, your flower petals should be totally dry by now. If they're not, you might wanna go ahead and let them dry, or just throw caution to the wind and see what happens when you add this bright, bold layer of detail marks. Thoroughly rinse that brush, get all the orange out, and grab a green again that you love, and you're going to add a few small press and lift. This is green filler. Just little suggestions of texture that fill the space in a really interesting way. Now remember that brush I mentioned that gives a really fine line very easily? That's the next brush we're using. It's the liner brush. Now this brush is incredible. It has a little bit of a learning curve, but let's give it a go. You're gonna load this brush up. About 60% of the brush's moisture should be paint and about 40% should be water. It's gonna take you some time to figure out what in the heck I mean by that, but it's just a general rule of thumb. And then when that brush is loaded, make sure there's not like a bead of paint about to drip off of it. If there is, dab it on a paper towel and you're good to go. Start making some thin lines that start at the base of the petal and then flare out and kind of follow the contour of the petal that you started with. As you're making those lines, use a really light touch. And you can even make some of those lines kind of wiggle a little bit. They don't all have to be uniform. Now, you want to be extra, go ahead and rinse that brush and mix up a darker green. That could be any green mixed with a blue or a brown or even a little bit of red. And you can add in some thin details into the leaves as well. Last but not least, go ahead and mix up a darker red. A lot of red, a little bit of green, and add some short, thin lines around the center of the flower where you were earlier making those orangey red details. And friends, you've done it. I have some incredible news. You're no longer a watercolor beginner, and this next tutorial is gonna feel even more joyful. So go ahead and get it. And until next time, I wish you so much happy painting.